I'm here to talk a little bit about what's happening on an international scale, particularly for startup companies that are looking to expand overseas. And when you say expand internationally, it really makes a difference in your perspective, right? So if you're an English company, despite the accent, I was actually born in London, but if you're a UK company expanding over here, for example, that's one set of circumstances to reconsider. If you're a company in Dublin or Cork or Galway looking to expand as well into the United States or into England, each one of those has separate situations. But for here, the focus will be really the US-based company expanding overseas. And clearly one reason for that would be to take advantage of scale and take your product overseas into new markets that are not currently present. And it also stopgaps a competitive person coming into the market here, because you go into their market first. But some of the key things why Ireland, right? So focusing in on expanding to Europe. If we take that as the assumption, we'd like to, I'd say really the key thing is start with Dublin as a place to go. Post-Brexit. Why is that important? Because post-Brexit, Ireland will be much more the key to what's happening in Europe. And I'm going to go through a couple of quick things. Obviously, you all know English speaking. Law. Common law. Basically, the law in Ireland, for somewhat obvious reasons, is very similar to the UK. Up until Brexit, really the UK was a center of sorting out disputes, international disputes with companies. And that center is beginning to move towards Dublin now. Which you can see there also, right? International banking. So the biggest thing about Brexit in London, as I think we're probably all read about, is the fact that you have the banks that are British banks, American banks, banks from everywhere that have a presence in London, Canary Wharf in particular. They are there so they can get passporting and allow them to trade without expense and barrier to Europe. And that's really what this whole thing is about. Now, as it turns out, they're dragging their feet on Brexit, and what happens with a large institution, a large bank like Citibank, for example, they cannot wait 2 years to figure out what to do and then make a decision, because a decision to move 500 or 1,000 people involves moving, building a building, expanding a building. All those things take time. So they have to make the following assumption: it will be a hard Brexit. And as a consequence of that, they're making decisions today on that. One of those decisions is to move people, not all people, and actually moving fewer people than was originally feared. But they are moving people to Dublin and to Frankfurt in particular. Those are the two big ones. Now, in the case of Dublin, international banking is picking up. Now, if you take a banking center, which Dublin was, and expands it 50%, and you expand the legal system quite a bit to support that in addition, you're creating an infrastructure when combined with the fact that Ireland is pro-business, low tax rate, 25% R&D credits that are helping start businesses, tech in particular. That reinforces the activity. And it may take a few years to really show up in the numbers, but we're going to find that that's going to really help companies really scale and put, Dublin and Ireland are on the map. It's going to be even more so as a center for new business. Wait a minute, if you could, please. So some key differences, right? So if you're an American company thinking, you know what, that sounds pretty good, Kevin. I'd like to move and expand my business to Europe. I'll just go to Ireland. They speak English, don't they? A little bit more involved. Cultural norms are different, right? So all of us here probably understand that better than most people in America. But the fact remains that when you are there, how you operate, what you say, what you do, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Those things are a little bit different. HR hiring terminations, key big differences, right? In America, let's take New York City for example. You work at will. You are an employee at will, meaning that if something goes wrong, I'm not happy, you could be fired tomorrow. Mm-hmm. All of us, I think, know whether you're in London, Dublin, Cork, Galway, doesn't matter, it ain't going to happen. There's a whole big process. So as a consequence of that, the upfront hiring decision becomes crucial, because the back end, if it doesn't work, is difficult. Right, so that's one thing there. Taxation, obviously the lower taxes, yes, but you need a proper accountant to work with your taxes, because every single taxing, by the way, VAT. You speak to an American about VAT, the eyes will roll back in their head. They don't understand what that is, but if you're going to be doing business in Dublin as a gateway to Europe, you better understand that pretty well. Contract enforcement. You will have a contract with whoever you're dealing with, but those rules and regulations and enforcement capabilities will be different in Europe than it is here. Quite a bit different. So you want to know going in what that might be before you just assume, which is the most dangerous, it is the same as America, for example. GDPR, I think everyone has heard about that. Data protection, that is in effect basically this month, the end of the month. It's in effect right now, but it's going to start being enforced by the end of the month. So you have to understand what that's going to be. And even if you operate in Europe via here, take for example Google, which I use for AdWords and things like that, I have to certify how long the people that are going onto my website, how long I'm going to keep their information. I did that yesterday. So it is expanding beyond the borders of Europe as we speak right now. Intellectual property, crucial too, right? If you're a tech company, if something of value which makes your company valuable, you have to protect that. And the protection of that in the US, via the tax, with the laws and everything else like that, will be different in Europe. You need to examine that closely before you make the decision. Okay, this chart here is just to show you the volatility of currency. So one of the factors to be aware of, whether you decide to go to London or decide to go to Ireland, because Ireland of course will be the euro, so it makes a difference what's happening to the euro relative to the currency you have. Now once if the dollar is higher than the euro, which it has been, it will probably continue to be, it makes a difference on if you are importing something from a European country, it's going to be cheaper. If you're exporting something directly, it'll be more expensive. But also, if you establish a business in Dublin with a view to expand to Europe, once you start to repatriate your money back, that is a factor to be considered, and you may have to take considerations of hedging and things of that type. But I will say you obviously need to leave some money there. If you're a private company, you're not going to have to report your sales and profits every month in the other currency. But if you're a public company, you will, and this becomes even more prevalent there. So, if you decide it makes sense to go from where your home base is, let's call it America for the moment, to Europe via Dublin and Ireland or someplace in there, well, how do we do it? What's the best method to use to figure out how to do it? Well, one of the best methods I've found for any startup, but it really can apply itself particularly well for an international scale-up, is to use what's called the lean startup method. Now this came out from Eric Ries in a Harvard Business Review 2013, not that long ago, but in the 5 years since then, it has really grown as a method, an approach that makes sense. And in essence, as you can see a little bit here, the essence is this. The traditional way to start up a business is to be in your basement or in the ever popular garage, a la Jobs, for example, right? So he was in his garage working on it, got some funding, perfected it. After a year or two of perfecting whatever it is you're working on, a computer, a software system, whatever it might be, then launch it. The problem with that is you've never done what? You have never examined the market to see what the demand for it is. You're making assumptions of what the demand is. Assumptions that your product idea, concept, is going to be proven in the real world. And it takes you a year and a half, 2 years to go through that, raise money, take your parents' money, whatever it might be, and then it doesn't pan out. The lean startup method is basically, and I'll show it to you in a second, a way to shorten that period of time dramatically by testing the real world almost immediately and getting feedback, and based on the feedback, adjusting your model to what you should be doing. So this is it here. And I'm sure that Raymond will share the slides with whoever would like to have them. But this is kind of the key thing here. And in looking over, this model is kind of a way to summarize key components of your business plan. And instead of having a 50-page document, it's a one-page document, but it takes time to do it. And I wanted to focus in on just a couple of key differences here. So unique value proposition, right? Anyone in business must have this. What is it about what you're doing that is distinct and really stands out in some fashion? Now, whatever that is in America, you better be sure that it's recalibrated for Europe, because it'll be different. If for no other reason, that the competition that you're experiencing in America is going to be very distinct and different from the competition you're going to get in Europe. And you better figure that out first, right? So that's one key thing. The second thing is channels. What are your channels for sales? Where is this coming from? Who is the person you should be going to? So part of the lean process is to come up with a unique value proposition, and then test that to be sure you're right in the real world through the channels. And, well, how am I going to sell my product? How is that going to operate? And then I need to go to the end point of some of those and start to test that. Whether you're giving free samples, whether you're going to seminars or sessions like this, and ask people, this is what I have, what do you think? Would you buy this? How would you change it? Feedback in the real world, and then you adjust that model based on that. And this becomes even more crucial if you're going to be overseas. And the last couple of things, really most important, cost structure. The cost structure of operating in any foreign country versus your own will be different. Right? We talked about the hiring. So by the way, in Europe, they don't have the 1 week vacation we have here in America. They have a month. And someone has maternity leave is not 6 weeks, it's 6 months. So if you don't understand that and you go in and you start operating on that basis, you're going to make it, holy cow, I need to hire 3 more people just to cover that. Was that more expensive? Yes. And then, by the way, you have to also have a pension. What? A pension? So these different things are factors that if you don't think about going forward before you launch are going to be very unpleasant shocks once you're there. So here, if you're going to use this mechanism, you have to, as I talked about, adjust the unique value proposition, review the revenue streams, where is this going to come from, and how is it different from what I'm doing now? Because it will be different. And you need to be sure to really focus on those differences: cost structure, manufacturing, labor, tax, all the things, distribution. How is this thing going to be distributed? Right, it's very different. In America, huge trucks travel across from California to New York City. That would be like going from Portugal to Czechoslovakia. So, I mean, there are big differences, and you have to kind of adjust for that. And of course, you have the test just thing as we talked about. Let me go past this. So, one of the things that is true in today, that distinct from really 10 years ago, is technology really allows companies to gain access to international markets almost from the beginning. And if you go back 10 or 15 years, this conversation would only make sense if companies were well along the way in terms of the size of the operation and could afford to do all the different things we just mentioned. But a small startup can almost do that immediately if they have an opportunity to use technology. If you're going to try to go from here any place else, you must have a big enough problem. Right? To go back to the unique value proposition, what is it you're solving? Is it a Me Too kind of product? Not going to work overseas. Is it a distinct, really major disruptive change in some fashion that you can then take to Europe? Yes, that will work. And that makes a particularly strong difference if, as part of your process, you need to raise capital, which you may very well need to. Right? You may need an angel investor, a venture capital. Venture capitalists have zero interest if you don't have a unique value proposition, and if you do not have something which is solving a major problem that they feel will then be translatable in to profit to them. Hiring local talent. One of the things that does not work is to take your management from New York City, move it to Dublin, say, okay, we're all set now. Because remember all the different things we talked about before, all these different changes there. No, you need to hire local management. It will be helpful, also especially if you're looking to raise capital, to hire a local partner in some way. If you have a local partner in any international market, plus yourself, and you go in to raise capital, it's going to be that much more helpful because they feel you have someone that knows what they're doing locally on the ground. Get professional advice, from all the different people we talked about, so you're not going the wrong direction. So, keys to success. Obviously, as we talked about, pre-launch planning, right? This takes a period of time to be sure we get right. Lean startup, I think, makes this big sense. Assess your products very closely. Don't assume just because it's great here, it's going to be great someplace else, because it probably will not be the case. Work with a trusted advisor. It's a little self-serving on my end, but you need someone to basically guide you through a many step process before you go. Be sure you don't miss any steps, which could be very expensive. And then the local partner and local hiring. We need to have local hiring. And also, if you want government funding, as Raymond was talking about before, these folks, Enterprise Island, all these organizations, IDA, all want what? They exist because they want to have companies grow in the local place that they are, Dublin, for example, Ireland in particular, and then what you need to do that, employment. I want employment. So that if you're not going to hire local people, they're not going to want to give you a lot of money. So that's basically the summary of it. I'll be glad to answer any questions either now or at any time. There's my contact information when Raymond is nice enough to send this around. Be glad to, no obligation, of course, any questions at all.
Great. You're spectacular. You're on the button.